Welcome to the Natural Healing Show. Keep it natural with the Natural Healing Show.
Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Dr. Friedemann Schaub. Dr. Friedemann Schaub is the author of the new book, The Empowerment Solution: 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. You can find out more about Dr. Friedemann Schaub and his wonderful work at his website, drfriedemann.com. Welcome, Dr. Friedemann.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Dr. Friedemann, why did you change from being a cardiologist, a heart doctor, and molecular biologist to helping people overcome anxiety?
Well, I think in a nutshell, it was always my purpose to help people in ways that I couldn't really, either as a doctor or as a researcher. And it started with me having anxiety as a child until my 30s and realizing that, there is something that my anxiety wants to tell me I'm not listening. It's not that there is something wrong with me, but there is something that obviously I'm unaware of. And what I needed to listen to was that I was not on the right path going down Western medicine careers. It just didn't really feel that this is fulfilling to me. And after all those years in college and universities, I had to come to the realization that if I want to either, have just a stellar career or a fulfilling life, I need to make a course correction. And that course correction was ultimately what led me to finding new ways without medication on how to overcome anxiety, by not fighting anxiety, but ultimately by trying to befriend yourself with the anxiety and understand more what really it's trying to tell us.
I love that message. That's just so powerful, right? And I do agree that when we're not on the right path, then we don't quite feel settled. We're not really at peace with ourselves. When deep down at the soul level, we know that we're not following our true soul calling.
And that's why I find is one of the key messages of anxiety. It does tell us, are we in alignment with our truth or not? And we can see this when people get anxious because they are trying to cheat the system or get away with stuff. And, there is the anxiety of also getting found out. But there is really this deeper inner wisdom, this knowingness. There is something that you're here to share. There is a purpose, a mission for you. And if you're not on that mission, your anxiety will say, well, come back. This is, the path that you should be on. Now, that's not the only message of the anxiety, but it's certainly one of them that I think is often overlooked.
Now, I know that before you wrote The Empowerment Solution, you wrote a book, The Fear and Anxiety Solution.
That's right. Yes.
Now, we're talking today about the Empowerment Solution. What are the 6 most common survival patterns?
Well, the Empowerment Solution basically describes what so many of us are going through, which is living in survival mode. And I wrote the Empowerment Solution based on my over 20 years of experience with my clients that I primarily helped to overcome fear and anxiety, because I realized, overcoming fear and anxiety, healing, befriending the fear and anxiety is not enough. We have to also change how we approach life. And when we are overcoming anxiety and still living in survival mode, lo and behold, we are falling back into this emotional default of feeling anxious. And so I saw that the same patterns repeated themselves over and over throughout the board. And I saw the same patterns in myself. And there are two overruling patterns, which is the avoidance pattern and the pleasing pattern, which basically means like you avoid anything that feels uncomfortable or dangerous, or you're trying to please others to somehow get their approval and feel safe or fitting in. And then there are these sub patterns. Each of those two has 3 sub patterns, and we can certainly talk more about them, but they're the victim, they're the procrastinator, there is the invisible pattern where you just don't want to really become the target of rejection. There is the chameleon, the pleaser, and the lover. And the lover is something that is, for me, one of the most destructive patterns that people can live in, which is basically being in a relationship where the person you're with is all that you want. It's like the, kind of the reason to be. And unfortunately, often people that choose this pattern are in abusive and very destructive codependent relationships. And it's so difficult for them to get out of it. And that is also why this pattern is such an important part of the book.
Now, why do you think, Dr. Schaub, that so many people end up living in survival mode? And how can someone tell if they are in survival mode?
Well, I think a lot of people are in survival mode because this is how our society, unfortunately, is structured. And this is something that I see in kids nowadays way more than, when I and you grew up, which is that very early on, the message is you have to compete, you have to succeed, you have to have a plan, you have to fit in. So there is not really a lot of room to discover what we are all about, what we like, what we don't like, what's, our juice. We are basically put on a track, and we need to continue on that track because otherwise we will fall behind, we will get rejected, we will not please our peers or parents or you name it. So that survival mode that says there is a condition for you to be accepted in the world creates a lot of stress. And because of that stress, people then go into those smaller survival patterns. It's like there is the overarching stress of modern day life. We haven't even talked about, the effect of media and social media and, how the planet in itself is already aching. And we certainly have to deal with that. But then there is, this overwhelm that we are feeling. And then we are saying, okay, I want to feel a little comfortable. So I just gonna not make waves. I'm just gonna be, the silent one. I just gonna lock myself into a very small comfort zone, and that gonna make me deal with stress. Or others say, oh wow, I'm so stressed, but makes me feel better when I have people that admire me, when I have people that like me, when I can be the helper or the caretaker, then at least I'm gonna get a little bit back in return. And since we are all so stressed and so anxious, most of us live in these patterns to find a sense of safety, a sense of belonging, and a sense of worthiness. And the problem is, we have not been told that we need to find that inside of ourselves. We are told that it all depends on being accepted by the tribe, being accepted by society, by somehow, either not getting bad attention or getting good attention. But there is no room for us just to be our truth. And that is really an illness of our society that I think leads to more and more young people on antidepressants, children having to take anti-anxiety medication, young people, especially young men, suicide rate is out of the roof. And that is why I wrote this book, to help people to find themselves. This is not just about the patterns. This is about how can you find a journey back to yourself? And that's what this book is about, coming home to yourself, spending time to discover who you really are.
That is such a powerful message, Dr. Schaub. And if someone's listening to this, we're talking about getting out of survival mode. And one of the ways you can tell if you're in survival mode or if you're in fight, flight, or freeze. Now, in my work as a medical intuitive healer, I talk about an amygdala hijacking. So first of all, what is the amygdala? So you have two of them. If you go into your brain above your ears, about 2 inches in, you have two little amygdalae, and they're shaped like little footballs. And a good analogy is like they're the control towers at the airport. So when information comes into the brain, the amygdalae decide, okay, I feel safe, and sends the information to the frontal lobes where you can think logically and make good choices. Or if it feels if you feel threatened, the amygdala send the information to the back of the brain where again you go into fight, flight, or freeze. And when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you can't access your wisdom. You can't access your true authentic self. You can't access everything that you've learned. So you could be the most well-educated person in the world, but when you're in survival mode, it's hard to even think logically. Now,
I agree. I feel, though, that trying for us to limit our anxiety to neurology and psychiatry is always a problem. We have to see it more as a consciousness issue. I think that's what anti-anxiety medication doesn't do. Anti-anxiety medication is calming down your nervous system and changing the neurobiology, but it doesn't really change your consciousness. It doesn't change your beliefs. It doesn't change your connection to yourself. It doesn't even change how you talk to yourself. So that's why in the fear and anxiety solution, I talk more about how can we see the anxiety more as a part of our conscious, our subconscious mind, and realize that the subconscious just tries to protect you, just like you would say the amygdala is trying to protect you. But, it's hard to do neurosurgery on yourself. So it's better to, work more with the part of you that you can actually communicate with, which is your subconscious, and just learning to, for lack of a better word, reprogram your consciousness to feeling safe and feeling, again, also ultimately empowered. And that is, where anxiety is no longer a flaw or a disorder or an illness. It is really much more us living in the illusion of having just to defend ourselves and protect ourselves consciously, rather than knowing that we also can expand, express, and share ourselves.
Great information. And in my work, I really appreciate you talk about how any anxiety medications, whether it's, an actual drug like Ativan, or even some natural healing remedies that people turn to calm the mind. But in my work as a medical intuitive healer, I talk about what I refer to as the 5 levels of healing. And we have to understand, in my humble opinion, not that I'm right, not that I know anything, you are a soul having a human experience. Your soul controls your mind. Your mind controls your emotions. Your thoughts and beliefs control what you're feeling. And so when we want to feel differently, we have to think differently. We have to examine our thoughts and beliefs. So our soul controls our mind controls our emotions. Our emotions actually control our energy, and then the energy body controls the physical. So many people who are trying to work on anxiety, they're working on the chemistry, which is only at the physical level. And I really appreciate that you're talking about, all right, well, but what are your thoughts? What are your beliefs? And what I find as a medical intuitive healer, I actually find that the mental level can be the most difficult level to work on, because people are so cemented in their beliefs. It's like, no, the world really is this dangerous, threatening place full of threatening people who are out to get me. And when that is your thoughts and that's what your beliefs, and then it's no wonder you feel anxious, right?
Yes, I mean, these are the filters that are in front of our perspective that are distorting how we see the world. At any time, we are probably filtering out 99% of all the information available or more because we cannot handle it. So we have just to, I mean, if you really would close your eyes for a moment and think about all the things that are read in your room, you probably wouldn't be able to tell because you have been not paying attention because it's just too much information, even in that room that you're in. So filtering is normal, but the filters that we create often are created early in our lives. And so if you early in your life felt that you have to protect yourself because your family is constantly in disarray and fighting, or there's chaos, or you have to somehow be aware of the bullies in the world that are going to hurt you, you have filters of self-protection, and they make you believe the world is a dangerous place, no one can be trusted, and you're not good enough. And unless you're working on changing those filters, you will always have only a distorted view on yourself and in the world and your life in front of you. So that is where the beauty about the mind is, that it does have a flexibility. We can change those filters. We can work on getting out of survival mode. It's just a matter of speaking and communicating with ourselves in a way that is enhancing and empowering, and not in ways that just beats the same old drum of negativity.
Albert Einstein, widely regarded as kind of a wise person, he said the most important question is whether or not you consider the universe to be a friendly place. And when you consider the universe to be a friendly place, then everything that happens is for your highest good. And if you don't, then there again, everything's threatening, and you're going to be shrouded by depression and anxiety your entire life. Now, with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. And we'll be right back with Dr. Friedemann Schaub, the author of The Empowerment Solution.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. We're listening today to Dr. Friedemann Schaub, author of The Empowerment Solution. Dr. Friedemann Schaub, what exactly is our subconscious mind, and how does our subconscious mind actually rule our life?
Well, the subconscious is, many things. And so that's, unfortunately not enough time to talk about all the things the subconscious is doing, but ultimately it's that deeper part of our mind that is in charge of anything that we are not consciously, intellectually, rationally in charge of. And, people compared with the iceberg, the conscious mind is a little thing that sticks out of the water, and the massive underneath the water is a subconscious mind. It does create our emotions. It does hold on to our memories, our beliefs, all these automatic patterns. I mean, how often do we brush our teeth and we're not even paying attention to it? Run by the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind, and that's where I started to get interested into it, is also that connector between the body and the mind. It's the mind-body connection, where you would say like, oh, I'm raising my arm, I'm choosing to raise my arm, but, you're not really controlling all these muscles that you're flexing and stretching. It is what the subconscious does. And so overall, about 70 to 80% or more of our daily activities are run by the subconscious mind. So it's an enormous active aspect of ourself. It has only one problem, that it does the same thing over and over again, that it has learned early in our lives until we are teaching the subconscious to do something differently. So it is an ally that needs somehow a guide And we are more afraid of the subconscious mind, or don't want to think about the subconscious mind, or blame the subconscious mind for nightmares and eating unconscious ice cream while watching TV, versus saying, hey, the subconscious is my friend. I should really get a hold of the subconscious. And so we are missing out. You mentioned Einstein. Einstein said we are using only 10% of our potential. Well, I think that's the reason why. Because these 90% that are in our subconscious, we are not really tapping into, and we should.
Great insights. And going back to what I was talking about, the amygdala and the, being like the control towers at the airport. Your logical mind is in the frontal lobes of your brain. And when you feel threatened and the information goes to the back of the brain, the reptilian brain, you're literally reacting based on old programming. And when you're in old programming, you're not really evaluating, is this a good idea? Does this make sense? Is it true? And when we look at our subconscious mind, where all those thoughts and beliefs come from, they come from our family of origin. So for example, if let's say you're listening to this broadcast and you're in anxiety about money, well, you want to think about what did my family say or think about money? And then there's the culture that you grew up in, right? Because different people grow up in specific cultures. So what are the cultural thoughts? What are the cultural beliefs? And then, looking at the world at large. So many of the thoughts and beliefs that are in our subconscious mind, I feel as a medical intuitive healer, they didn't even just start with us. They could be even what's called a genome, which is a genetic thought pattern, which it goes back through your ancestors, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are so many times where we are unconsciously passing down also to our own children beliefs that we have heard and things that we have been shown by our parents and grandparents. And that's where, we really have to also ask ourselves, am I literally just living as an extension of my, my oh my God. You know what I mean? Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a tongue breaker. Or am I really living my truth, where I really live what makes me as a unique individual person, just as one time here on Earth? And, I talked to a client of mine the other day that, she was struggling with anxiety, and she was also struggling with her sense of that she never really had accomplished anything in her life. And so she's in her 60s, and we talked about how she raised her children. And the way she was raised was with a lot of, authority, and also with corporal punishment, and lots of conditional love, and everyone in her family felt unsafe. And that went back to how her parents felt in their families unsafe. And she completely broke that cycle. I mean, she raised her children learning from the mistakes of her parents and the ancestors before. And so she ended the cycle of violence. She ended the cycle of imprinting a sense of you're not safe unless you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. You're only conditionally loved. You always have to watch out for getting hurt and punished again. She broke that cycle. And all her kids are now raising their kids, her grandchildren, accordingly, with much more love, much more acceptance, much more openness. And that's a huge accomplishment. And so she realized that's maybe one of the greatest reasons why she came here, to be the healer of that lineage, of those various lineages that came all together in her. And a big shift happened inside of her when she realized that.
Absolutely. So what a great story. Now, we're going to be talking in a moment about the 6 most common survival modes. But how can someone tell if we're actually embodying and expressing our true authentic self?
Well, I think what you probably can tell more is how you're not. So anxiety is a good, already a marker for probably not living your truth because you're afraid of something versus excited to be here, or expansive. You're contracting yourself, holding yourself back, or you're looking at others for orientation and how you need to be in order to be wanted rather than actually finding those answers inside of yourself. And then there is also that overall feeling of feeling uncomfortable with ourselves that tell us that we are not really connected to our truth. So many people have a hard time being alone with themselves. They're afraid. They want to immediately turn on the TV as soon as they're entering the house. They don't want to hear their inner voice. They don't want to feel their body. They look in the mirror and think they're looking at a stranger or someone they don't really like. And so that bad relationship with yourself, of course, is not in alignment with your truth. It's not in alignment with your authenticity. So the book shows you 6 keys to unlocking that connection to your truth. But one key is really to become again curious about yourself, curious about who you really are. And one of those keys is self-compassion. And self-compassion there are always, tools and processes in the book. There are 22 tools and processes you can get, but one of them is going to meet your innocent self. And your innocent self is basically the self that you were before you got into survival mode, before you lost your innocence. And we all had that. I mean, I was the innocent self as a happy-go-lucky, blonde little boy with blue eyes who just felt like life is magical. And I looked at the walls and I could see the energy, and I was just in awe of how amazing it is to be here, until I had a D in a math test. And then I got pretty much made, like 1 inch tall with a hat. And from that on, I lost all belief in that magic, in that trust, in that unconditionality. And I, had to wait 30 years to get it back. And I think that a lot of us have these stories where we realize I was so much fun. I was always connected to nature. I was, always liking to do skits for people, and, the creativity or this imagination that we had. So remember who you were. Go back and remember your truth, because as a little child, you're more connected to your authentic self than you probably are right now. So whatever you can unearth, your desires, your core qualities, the way you saw the world, that's what you want to start to remember in order to get a feel for your truth again.
Great information. Now, Dr. Schaub, when I'm doing medical intuitive readings and when I'm reading a person at the soul level, one of the things I look at is there's really 3 phases: unconscious, awakening, and conscious. So I'll start backwards, because we're talking about how do we know when we're our true authentic self. When you're conscious, then you're aware that you're a soul. You're aware that you have a purpose. You have some connection to what your purpose is, right? And you're at peace with who you are. You're at peace with who you are and why you're here. When you're awakening, you're in this process of waking up to who you are. And the awakening process is not necessarily always comfortable. Maybe you have a major illness or a loss, a job loss, a divorce, or something, or some major life event that's kind of like a course correction. It's like, okay, you were going over here, but we're going to take you right back to where you really need to be. So you're waking up to, oh, wow, you mean I am a soul? Oh, wow, I must have a purpose. So you're awakening. And then unconscious, that's kind of like where we all start as children, where you're alive, you have a body, but you're not really sure like why you're here or what your life is about.
Well, yes, I do believe it, but I don't think it matters. I think in some ways when you are a child, I still believe that there is information that we forget. So maybe we don't really know exactly why we're here, but I, for example, and obviously I see this in other people too, but I was as a child getting on these rides with my mom she was a physician in a little tiny area in the Black Forest in Germany, and we visited patients in the farms. And so when she went to the patient, I talked to the people around me, and I was like 7, 8 years old, and people told me anything. It was almost like I had the magic key to open them up. And that was not something that I knew is actually helpful in my career, like 30 years later. But it was something that I knew was a gift. There was something that I just made people feel they can trust. And so I think as children, we have the awareness of our gifts. Maybe we don't know the path, maybe we don't know how to express them, but we are connected to ourselves because we don't necessarily have those filters. We don't yet have the filters of limitations that people project on us. Like I said, then my parents projected their own insecurities on us. Or when you grow up in an environment where it was all about money, all of a sudden you feel like, well, okay, you're defined by your success and by your bank account. And so those filters are basically burying eventually that what I would say as a child is your truth. And so it's good to go back and remember and maybe reawaken that child inside of you to wake up as a part of that waking up process.
Wonderful information. And with that, let's take another break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. You're listening to the Natural Healing Show. This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Dr. Friedemann Schaub, author of The Empowerment Solution. What is the victim pattern, and how can we recognize when that survival pattern has taken over?
The victim pattern is basically the pattern that makes us hold on to whatever happened to us in the past and then deduct that the past is going to repeat itself. And I think all of us have had bad experience in the past at some point. We all have our perpetrators that disappointed us or betrayed us or hurt us. And the victim is basically holding on to what happened there and lives in that worry that it's going to happen again. And so the hiding out is a part of being in the victim mode, this really feeling like, well, I'm not giving anyone a chance. I'm not trusting anyone. I got hurt once. You fool me twice. No way. I'm not someone who, goes into this mistake again. And you know that you're a victim when you are often thinking about the past, when you're often seeing people as, oh yeah, that's exactly what, John or Jane were doing in the past. When you are confronted by other people and say, you don't have to feel this way because maybe, the past has changed and maybe, you can move forward and maybe there are people that actually mean well with you, and you put your heels in and say, no, that's not true. This will only happen again. I will get fired again. I will not really have what I want. So the victim is often very invested in their story and is more invested in beating the drum of their misery and their pain than really wanting to take responsibility and saying, like, what can I learn from the past? Why was this done for me? How can I actually see that we are all teachers and students for each other? And those that hurt me the most, maybe were the best teachers. And so taking ownership of the past rather than living from it or through it and repeating it over and over again, that is what overcoming or outgrowing this victim pattern is all about.
Now, what is the invisible pattern and how can we recognize her?
The invisible is often misunderstood as the pattern where you're the wallflower, you're the one who is treading lightly, who is usually wearing beige or gray or black to not be noticed, and never really says anything that could potentially upset anyone. But that's not true, because there is also the invisibility that most of us have, which is the invisibility to showing our deeper sides, our vulnerable sides, the things that we kind of hide from others because we feel it's not acceptable, or it potentially makes us look weak. And that is where invisibility is, I think, a very, very common problem. We are not open to be really true and show all our expressions. We are much more in that, hiding behind a mask. You can't even hide behind a mask of anger or control or power and still ultimately, be in the invisibility pattern, because whatever is inside of you, you want to make invisible, and you're not owning because you're so afraid of judgment, of rejection, of criticism. And that's why this hiding pattern is something that I feel you can only overcome when you are connecting to that most vulnerable part of you, which I introduced as the innocent self, and realizing that this is what you have been hiding most of your life. There is something you have been hiding forever. And it has also a lot of gifts and a lot of, qualities to share that you can now bring back to the forefront.
What is the procrastinator, and how can we tell if he has taken over our life?
I mean, that's something that I think we also have very commonly in our toolbox of how not to do it, which is basically, you are avoiding discomfort of tasks or of demands of life that you just are either afraid of, that you feel are too big, that you are afraid of you're going to fail in. And again, it's not just about career or paying the bills or the taxes. It's also procrastinating around self-care. So many people don't really want to go to the doctor because they don't want to hear that they should lose a few pounds, or they don't want to get, the bad results of the blood tests. So many people procrastinate around going and making peace with their families because they don't want to necessarily go through the discomfort of being confronted with old stories, or maybe being told that they hurt somebody. So procrastination is basically not cleaning up and getting in order your life. And there are always certain aspects of life that get ignored, that we are kind of uncomfortable with, and they get pushed aside. And unfortunately, they don't get any smaller when we push them aside. They actually get bigger and bigger and bigger. So the key to overcoming procrastination is self-reliance. And self-reliance is not just about, doing with humming and hawing the things that you don't want to do. It's actually realizing, when I commit to saying I'll do this tomorrow, and I'm gonna not just lie to myself by not doing it, which what most procrastinators are doing, I'm actually following through. What grows inside of you is the belief in yourself that your word counts. Most procrastinators have undermined their self-worth and their self-esteem because they have been lying to themselves for so many years by pretending they're going to do it, and then they don't. And then they are lying to the people around them and say, oh yeah, I'm going to get it done, but they haven't. And so they live in this continuous cycle of lying. And that is a really, really stressful place to be in. And so taking self-reliance again is a key to unlocking the trust in yourself, and to change not only your procrastination habits, it's just going to change how you show up in life.
What is the chameleon, and how can we tell when the chameleon is in charge of our subconscious mind?
So that's a pattern that kind of, is blending in. The chameleon is the part that, is able to adjust to all the environments, is always able to say the right things because, it's keenly aware of what people expect you to say, what people expect you to believe. You go out with your in-laws and, you know that they're all Republicans, so you're just laughing at their jokes, even though you are not really believing in it at all. You go out with your boss and you are just, pretending that you're so interested in what the boss has to say, even though you're not. So you're pretending. You're living basically in that I want to fit in. I want to not, get any kind of negative attention. So I'm blending in. And that's, it can be very helpful when you are thinking about creating some kind of rapport or connection. It's very tribal to want to belong, but it is also a huge distraction because you're so focused on what other people want you to be versus focusing on who you really are. So the key is here self-awareness and bringing yourself back to what I call your essence or your soul or the core of who you are. And there is a process that leads you back to the time before you were incarnate, before you were in your body, and you are reconnecting to your consciousness, the consciousness that is not in a physical form, but it is ultimately that what will continue to move on once you leave this physical form.
What is the helper role, and how can we tell if that survival pattern is holding us back?
Well, the helper pattern is the pattern where we are making other people more important than ourselves. We are giving, overgiving, usually being underappreciated, usually also underappreciating ourselves. This can be the peacemaker, this can be the caretaker, this can be the person who ultimately, becomes the martyr because they never really have time for themselves or any energy left for themselves because it's all about others. And on paper, it seems very selfless, seems very desirable. Aren't we not here about service and giving to others? But underneath that, it's a survival pattern because you want something in return. You want people to see you as someone that is needed, as someone that is indispensable, as someone who, they are so grateful for that you're in their life. So you want positive attention. You want their award of some kind of a confirmation for your worthiness from others back. And you're willing to do whatever it takes to get that. And you pretend it's your role. And the key to unlock that and turn it around is self-commitment, where you really understand about this is energy that you're giving. And this energy that you're giving is a resource. And just as you would eventually run out of money if you only would spend money and give it out and never really have money coming back in, you do the same with your energy and your time you're giving. And at some point you have nothing left to give. And that is not in balance. That is not in harmony. So how can you have better boundaries? How can you take better care of yourself? How can you stop these common narratives in your head? Well, giving is better than receiving, or I'm just a good person, I cannot help it, or I'm so empathetic, I cannot stand pain. All those things need to be addressed. And then you can be a generous and giving person, but you can also be generous and giving to yourself.
What is the lover survival role, and how can we tell if that persona is dominant and holding us back?
That's the one that I mentioned before, where you are declaring love and being in a romantic relationship as the reason to be. And often it is with people that have been left by a parent or have been often also abused by a parent early in their life. And so they're looking for a replacement. They're looking for something that makes that relationship that was so painful and was so dysfunctional, that repairs it. And so their choice of going through life is making a relationship work. That's all they care about. And as soon as they're in the relationship, they become whatever that person that they're with want them to be. They take on the hobbies, they take on the interests, they take on the language, And often it creates a codependency, unfortunately. And when the relationship gets sour, when the relationship gets abusive, they still hold on to this relationship, no matter how many friends and family members are saying, why are you doing this to yourself? Don't you see there are red flags? This is not good for you. They are talking themselves out of it. They're defending the person they're with because this is their life raft. Holding on to the relationship is the only thing that keeps them above water. And without it, they feel completely lost. And there, the key is self-love. How can you actually learn to love yourself? A lot of people came to me and asked me, I know you need to love yourself in order to be in a relationship, but man, no one tells me how to do this. Well, there are very specific steps described on how to learn to love yourself that are not difficult, but they are simply steps you want to commit to.
How can we learn to love ourselves?
Well, ultimately, it's about whatever we do that works well in a relationship with someone we love, we need to turn back on ourselves. So let's start, for example, with the famous love languages and the things that make us feel loved. We don't really think about what makes us feel loved in regards to, well, if that's what makes me feel loved, I should do this more often for myself. Let's say, for example, you love words of affirmation. You want to hear, oh, you're so lovely, you're so wonderful. You get compliments and it makes you really just alive. Well, that's where you need to turn your self-talk around exactly into that. So using that as a part of it. And then what also is very powerful in a relationship with another person is to listen to, the bits. The bits basically means like you have signals from your partner that the partner wants to connect. The partner says, hey, I just read this in an interesting magazine, and this is a desire for connection. And then if you are a good partner, say, oh, tell me more about this. You have created the connection. Now, the truth is your mind, your body, and your heart, they also want to connect to you. And we are not paying attention to those bits of connection. When our body is aching, we're not giving it rest, or we are not taking care of it. When our mind is racing, when we are scared or anxious, we try to run away from this rather than turning towards this. When our heart feels unsafe, when we are feeling empty and void, we're not trying to fill ourselves up. We are trying simply to numb ourselves out. So paying attention to when these different aspects of ourselves trying to connect and connecting with a desire to create a more loving and caring relationship with ourselves, that is a fundamental step to learn to love yourself again.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Dr. Friedemann Schaub, author of the new book, The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. You can find out more about Dr. Friedemann and his wonderful work at his website, drfriedemann.com. And remember, when you take the time to ask yourself, who has the body right now? Am I being my true authentic self, or are these other survival modes taking over? You can heal yourself naturally. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Natural Healing Show. Keep it natural with the Natural Healing.